She stood there, eyes blazing like a stranger I'd raised for 32 years, her face twisted with a fury I'd never seen before. My daughter Autumn filled the doorway of my kitchen, her designer purse, one I'd bought her last Christmas, clutched in her manicured hands like a weapon. Behind her lurked Blake, her boyfriend of 2 years, smirking with the satisfaction of someone who'd finally gotten what he wanted. "I don't need you anymore." The words exploded from her lips with such venom that I actually stepped backward, my hip catching the edge of my kitchen counter. "Do you hear me, Mother? I don't need you anymore." If stories of family betrayal and finding strength in our darkest moments resonate with you, please subscribe to hear more real stories like mine, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and the price of unconditional generosity. My hands began to tremble as I gripped the granite countertop. The same counter where I'd taught her to roll cookie dough when she was 7, where we'd shared countless cups of coffee and dreams about her future. The irony wasn't lost on me. This beautiful kitchen, with its warm yellow walls and family photographs watching like silent witnesses, had become the stage for the most devastating moment of my life. "Autumn, honey, what are you talking about?" My voice came out as barely a whisper, cracked and uncertain. I could hear the desperation in my own words, the way they hung in the air like a plea. "What's happened? What did I do?" She laughed. Actually laughed. A harsh, brittle sound that made my stomach lurch. "What did you do? You've been controlling my life with your money for years, Mother. Every dollar comes with strings attached. Every gift comes with guilt." Her voice grew stronger, more confident, as if she'd rehearsed these words. "Well, I'm done being your puppet." The photographs on the walls seemed to mock me in that moment. There was 5-year-old Autumn on her first day of kindergarten, gap-toothed and glowing. Autumn at her high school graduation, radiant in her cap and gown. Autumn at her college ceremony, where I'd cried tears of pride as she walked across that stage. When had that bright-age girl turned into this cold stranger? My legs felt weak, and I lowered myself into one of the kitchen chairs, the same oak chairs my late husband Harold had insisted we buy 25 years ago. "Sweetheart, I've only ever tried to help you. After your father passed, I just wanted to make sure you were okay, that you had everything you needed." "Everything I needed?" she interrupted, her voice rising to a near shriek. "I needed a mother, not a bank. I needed support, not surveillance. Do you know what it's like having to justify every purchase, every decision, every breath I take because you're funding my life?" Blake stepped forward then, his arm sliding possessively around Autumn's waist. I'd never liked him, something about his shifty eyes and the way he'd moved into my daughter's life so quickly after her father's death. "Your mom's been suffocating you, babe," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's time to cut the cord." I felt something breaking inside my chest, a physical pain that radiated outward from my heart. This was my child, my only child, the baby I'd rocked through countless sleepless nights, the toddler I'd chased around this very kitchen, the young woman I'd supported through every triumph and heartbreak. How had we gotten here? "Autumn, please," I managed to say, standing up slowly, my legs still unsteady. "Let's sit down and talk about this. Whatever's wrong, we can work through it together. That's what families do." But she was already shaking her head, backing toward the door with Blake's hand guiding her. "No, Mother, I'm done with your version of family. I'm done with the guilt trips and the emotional manipulation. I'm done pretending that your money doesn't come with a price tag attached to my soul." The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. Emotional manipulation? Is that really what she thought my love was? Every sacrifice I'd made after Harold's death, working extra hours to pay for her graduate school, postponing my own dreams to ensure her comfort, opening my home to her when her marriage failed, had she seen it all as manipulation? "I love you," I whispered, the words falling between us like broken glass. "I've only ever loved you." For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Doubt, maybe even regret. But Blake's grip on her waist tightened, and her expression hardened again. "Love shouldn't come with a bill, Mother." And then they were gone, leaving me alone in my kitchen with the photographs and the silence and the devastating realization that everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my daughter had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The silence in my kitchen felt suffocating after they left, but as I sat there, surrounded by the echoes of Autumn's cruel words, my mind began to drift backward. How had we gotten to this point? When did my loving, grateful daughter transform into this angry stranger who saw my generosity as chains? It started so innocently, just 6 months after Harold's funeral. I remember the exact moment. I was still wearing black most days, still setting 2 coffee cups out of habit each morning. Autumn had called, her voice thick with tears over some unexpected car repair bill. $800 she didn't have, and her voice carried that particular tremor that every mother recognizes as genuine distress. "Mom, I hate to ask, but could you possibly help me out, just until my next paycheck?" she'd said, and my heart had immediately opened. Of course I could help. That's what mothers do. Harold had left us comfortable, and what good was financial security if I couldn't ease my daughter's burden? I'd driven the check over that very afternoon, watching her face light up with relief and gratitude. She'd hugged me so tightly, called me her lifesaver, told me she didn't know what she'd do without me. Those words had been like sunlight breaking through the grief that had clouded my world since losing Harold. For the first time in months, I felt needed, purposeful, alive. But that one act of kindness had opened a door I didn't even realize existed. 2 weeks later, it was her credit card payment. "Just this once, Mom, I promise. I miscalculated my budget." 3 weeks after that, it was groceries. The prices have gone up so much, and Blake's between jobs right now. Each request came with the same apologetic tone, the same promises that it was temporary, the same grateful hugs that made me feel like the mother I'd always tried to be. Blake had entered the picture around this time, a smooth-talking man in his 30s who claimed to be an entrepreneur but never seemed to have any actual income. He was handsome in a weathered sort of way, with the kind of confidence that made my widowed daughter feel beautiful again. I should have seen the red flags then, should have questioned why a man his age was dating my vulnerable daughter and living rent-free in her apartment. The requests began to multiply. It wasn't just emergencies anymore. It was Blake's business opportunities that required small investments, Autumn's professional wardrobe for job interviews that never seemed to materialize into actual employment, their monthly expenses when Blake's latest venture fell through. Each time, they painted it as temporary. Each time they promised to pay me back, and each time I found myself reaching for my checkbook because saying no felt like abandoning my daughter when she needed me most. "Mom, you're amazing," Autumn would say, her eyes bright with relief each time I solved another crisis. "I don't know what we'd do without you. You're saving our lives." Those words became my drug. In the fog of grief and loneliness that had consumed me since Harold's death, being needed felt like being loved. When my daughter called me amazing, when she told me I was saving their lives, the empty house didn't feel quite so hollow. The silence didn't press quite so heavily on my chest. Then came the suggestion that changed everything. "Mom, you know how you're always worried about us?" Autumn had said during one of their weekend visits, curled up on my couch with Blake's arm around her shoulders. "What if we made things easier? I could take over some of your bills, help you manage your finances, and maybe you could add me to your credit cards. Just for emergencies, of course, so I don't have to keep asking you for help all the time." It had sounded so reasonable, so thoughtful even. She was offering to help me, to take the burden of bill paying off my aging shoulders. The fact that it also gave her access to my accounts seemed like a natural extension of our close relationship. After all, she was my only child, my heir, my everything. Who else would I trust with such intimate details of my financial life? Looking back now, I can see how carefully orchestrated it all was. Blake had been quieter during that conversation, but I caught him nodding encouragingly whenever Autumn spoke. I realize now that every word had been planned, every emotion calculated to appeal to my loneliness and my desire to be useful. Within a month, Autumn had access to 2 of my credit cards and was handling my utility bills, my insurance payments, even my grocery shopping. "Let me take care of you the way you've taken care of me," she'd said, and my foolish heart had swelled with pride. My daughter was finally mature enough, responsible enough, to shoulder some of life's burdens. But responsibility wasn't what she was learning. The charges started small, a dinner here, a shopping trip there. When I questioned them gently, Autumn had reasonable explanations. "I had to buy groceries anyway, so I picked up yours too. Blake and I were celebrating his new job prospects, and I wanted to take him somewhere nice." Each expense was justified, each purchase explained away with logic that seemed sound on the surface. The amounts grew gradually, so subtly that I barely noticed at first. A $100 grocery trip became $200. A modest dinner became an expensive weekend getaway. Business clothes for Blake somehow required a $500 shopping spree. Each time I raised concerns, Autumn had an answer ready, often delivered with just enough irritation to make me feel guilty for questioning her judgment. "Mom, don't you trust me?" she'd say, her voice carrying a hurt that felt genuine. "After everything we've been through together, don't you think I've earned the right to use my own judgment?" And there it was. The emotional manipulation disguised as wounded feelings. She was no longer using my credit cards. They had become hers by some twisted logic that painted my concern as distrust and my questions as insults. I found myself apologizing for my own reasonable inquiries, reassuring her that of course I trusted her, that I was just being overly cautious in my old age. The worst part was how natural it all felt. The transition from grateful daughter to entitled beneficiary happened so gradually that I didn't recognize it until it was too late. My emergency credit card became their vacation fund. My household account became their personal shopping allowance. My home became their second residence, with Blake practically living in my guest room more often than not. Friends tried to warn me, of course. My neighbor Dorothy would raise her eyebrows when she saw Blake washing a car I'd unknowingly purchased in my driveway. My sister Ruth would make carefully worded comments about boundaries and independence during our weekly phone calls. But I dismissed their concerns as jealousy or misunderstanding. They didn't see how grateful Autumn was, how much she needed me, how happy it made me to be able to provide for her happiness. I had convinced myself that this was what good mothers did. We sacrificed for our children's well-being. We put their needs above our own comfort. We used our resources to ensure their success. The fact that Harold had worked his entire life to build the security I was now freely distributing didn't factor into my emotional calculations. In my grief-addled mind, money was just a tool to maintain my connection to the only family I had left. What I couldn't see then was how that connection was becoming a cage for both of us. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I was sitting in my sunroom with my first cup of coffee, watching the cardinals at my bird feeder and trying to ignore the growing stack of credit card statements I'd been avoiding. Harold used to handle all our finances, and even 2 years after his death, managing money still felt overwhelming and foreign. My phone buzzed with a text alert from my bank. Usually I ignored these notifications. They were typically just confirmations of automatic payments or deposit alerts. But something about the amount caught my eye. Alert: $2,847.63. Charged to account ending in 4429. $2,800. On a Tuesday morning. I stared at the number, my coffee growing cold in my hands. What could possibly cost that much money at 9:15 on a weekday morning? My fingers trembling slightly, I opened my banking app and scrolled through the recent transactions. What I saw made my stomach drop to my feet. Nordstrom, $847.00. Best Buy, $1,200.00. Some restaurant I'd never heard of, $315.00. Uber rides, $127.00. All charged within the last 18 hours. I scrolled further back, my heart pounding harder with each swipe. The past month was a blur of charges I didn't recognize, at stores I'd never visited, for amounts that made my head spin. A $400 0 cents charge at some boutique called Lux and Lovely, 3 separate charges at different liquor stores, a $600 0 cents payment to something called Elite Fitness Solutions. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. This couldn't be right. There had to be some mistake, some fraud, some explanation that didn't involve. The sound of laughter from upstairs froze my blood. I hadn't realized Autumn and Blake were even in the house. They'd been staying here more frequently lately, claiming their apartment had heating issues that their landlord was taking forever to fix. But it was May. Why would heating be an issue in May? The laughter came again, Blake's voice low and smug, followed by Autumn's higher giggle. They were right above me in what used to be Harold's office, the room I'd converted into a guest space when they started staying over regularly. I found myself moving toward the stairs like a woman in a trance, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Or maybe I was. All I knew was that I needed to understand what was happening to my money, to my life, to the daughter I thought I knew. Completely clueless, Blake was saying as I reached the top of the stairs. His voice carried clearly through the thin door, casual and contemptuous. I told you she'd never notice if we spread it out over a few weeks. I know, right? Autumn's voice made my knees weak. There was no trace of the grateful, struggling daughter I'd been helping for months. Instead, she sounded gleeful. She barely looks at the statements, just pays whatever shows up and writes it off as helping her precious daughter. My hand found the wall to steady myself. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be my Autumn speaking. The jewelry store yesterday was inspired, babe, Blake continued, and I could hear him moving around the room. That necklace is gorgeous on you, and since Mama's paying anyway. They both laughed, and the sound felt like acid in my veins. She's got plenty, Autumn said, her voice taking on a mocking tone that chilled me to the bone. Poor little widow, all alone with her big empty house and her fat bank account? She's probably thrilled to have a reason to spend it. Makes her feel useful. The words hit me like physical blows. Every fear I'd had about being a burden, about being alone, about having nothing to offer besides money, she'd seen it all, cataloged it all, and used it against me. Besides, Autumn continued, what's she going to do with all that money anyway? Sit here and stare at Dad's pictures until she dies? At least this way it's going to good use. We're young, we're building a life together. She should be happy to contribute to that. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, my vision blurring with tears I refused to shed. The casual cruelty in her voice was devastating. But worse was the calculated nature of it. This wasn't impulse or desperation. This was planned, deliberate exploitation. How much do you think she's got, total? Blake asked, and I could hear papers rustling. Were they going through my financial documents? Had they been in Harold's desk, rifling through our private papers? More than enough, Autumn replied. The life insurance alone was $500,000, plus Dad's pension, plus the house is worth at least $400,000. She's sitting on close to $1 million, Blake. $1 million that she's just hoarding while we struggle to build our future. Struggling to build their future with my money in my house, using my grief and loneliness as weapons against me. And the best part, Blake's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, is that she actually thinks we're grateful. She thinks she's being a good mother. Their laughter echoed down the hallway, and something inside me crystallized into a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't love. This wasn't family. This wasn't even simple greed. It was sociopathic manipulation of the cruelest kind. I backed away from the door slowly, my mind reeling but already beginning to formulate a plan. They thought I was weak, thought I was stupid, thought I was so desperate for their company that I'd tolerate anything. They thought I was just a lonely old woman with more money than sense. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Downstairs in my kitchen, I sat at the table where Harold and I had made every major decision of our 40-year marriage. And I opened my laptop. My hands were steady now, my vision clear. The shock was giving way to something else, Not anger exactly, but a cold, determined clarity I hadn't felt since Harold's death. I pulled up my bank accounts, my credit card statements, my investment portfolios. For the first time in 2 years, I really looked at the numbers, traced the patterns, saw the steady drain of resources that had been happening under my nose. The amounts were staggering. Over $30,000 in the past 6 months alone. $30,000 of Harold's legacy, of the security he'd worked his entire life to provide for me, siphoned away by the daughter I'd raised to be better than this. But the money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the betrayal of trust, the weaponization of my love, the complete lack of remorse or gratitude or basic human decency. They weren't just stealing my money, they were stealing my dignity, my peace of mind, my faith in the one relationship I'd thought was sacred. That was the moment I realized my love had turned into their leverage, and I'd been complicit in my own destruction. But no more. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Patricia Hartwell, the estate attorney who'd helped us update our wills after Harold's diagnosis. It was time to remind my daughter and her boyfriend that I wasn't just a lonely old woman with deep pockets. I was a widow who'd learned to fight for what mattered. And what mattered now was taking my life back. The number for Patricia Hartwell sat on my phone screen like a lifeline. I'd met her 3 years ago when Harold and I were updating our estate planning, back when such preparations felt like distant possibilities rather than urgent necessities. She was a sharp woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach that had impressed both Harold and me. More importantly, she understood the complexities of family dynamics and money. But before I called anyone, I needed to understand the full scope of what had been done to me. Knowledge was power, and I was going to arm myself with every piece of ammunition I could find. I spent the next 2 hours methodically going through every account, every statement, every transaction from the past year. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. It wasn't just the obvious purchases, the jewelry, the electronics, the expensive dinners. There were cash advances, bill payments for accounts I'd never heard of, even what appeared to be rent payments for an apartment I'd never known they still had. They'd turned my financial accounts into their personal ATM machine, and they'd done it with surgical precision. Small amounts here and there that wouldn't trigger major alerts, mixed in with legitimate expenses that provided cover for their theft. It was sophisticated, calculated, and absolutely devastating. The most painful discovery was a series of charges to a travel website. They'd booked a vacation to Cancun, a week-long trip to an all-inclusive resort that cost more than many people made in a month. They'd never mentioned any vacation to me. While I'd been sitting in my empty house, managing my grief and feeling grateful for their occasional company, they'd been planning tropical getaways with my money. By the time I finished my financial archaeology, I'd documented over $40,000 in unauthorized or deceptive charges over the past 8 months. $40,000 that could have secured my future, paid for healthcare, or simply remained as the safety net Harold had worked so hard to provide. I called Patricia at exactly 11 o'clock. "Mrs. Coleman." Her voice was warm but professional. "What a pleasant surprise. How are you holding up?" "Patricia, I need your help," I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "I'm in a situation with my daughter, and I need to protect myself legally and financially." There was a pause. Then her tone shifted to complete attention. "Tell me everything." I laid out the entire story, the gradual manipulation, the unauthorized charges, the overheard conversation that had opened my eyes. Patricia listened without interruption, and I could hear her taking notes on the other end of the line. "Eleanor," she said when I finished, using my first name in a way that felt both professional and compassionate, "what you're describing is financial elder abuse. The fact that it's being perpetrated by your daughter doesn't make it less serious. In many ways, it makes it worse. Elder abuse." The term hit me like a cold slap of reality. I wasn't just a foolish woman who'd been too generous. I was a victim of a crime. "What can I do?" I asked. Several things, and we need to do them quickly, Patricia said. First, we're going to freeze your accounts and remove her access immediately. Then we're going to change your will, your power of attorney designations, and any other legal documents that give her control over your affairs. Finally, we're going to document everything for potential legal action. Legal action? The words stuck in my throat. Against my own daughter? Eleanor, she stole from you. The emotional relationship doesn't change the legal reality, but we'll take this one step at a time. Right now, the priority is stopping the bleeding and protecting what's left of your assets. Within an hour, I was sitting in Patricia's office downtown, a folder of bank statements and printed emails spread across her conference table. She'd called ahead to my bank, and a representative was standing by to make the necessary changes to my accounts. "Are you ready for this?" Patricia asked, her hand hovering over the phone. "Once we make these calls, there's no going back quietly. Your daughter will know immediately that you've discovered what she's been doing." I thought about Autumn's laugh echoing down my hallway, about Blake's casual contempt, about the vacation they'd taken with my money, while I grieved alone in the house Harold and I had built together. "Make the calls," I said. The first call was to my bank. Within 15 minutes, Patricia had arranged for all shared accounts to be frozen, all additional cards to be canceled, and all automatic payments to be suspended pending my review. The customer service representative was surprisingly understanding. Apparently, financial elder abuse was more common than I'd realized. "We'll need you to come in this week to set up new accounts and new security protocols," the banker explained. "And, Mrs. Coleman, I'm sorry this happened to you. We see it more often than we'd like, and it's never easy." The second call was more complex, updating my will and power of attorney documents. Harold and I had originally designated Autumn as our primary beneficiary and backup power of attorney, trusting that she would carry out our wishes with the same integrity we'd tried to instill in her. That trust had been catastrophically misplaced. "I want to change everything," I told Patricia. "The will, the power of attorney, the beneficiary designations on my accounts. Everything. Who would you like to designate instead?" It was a question I hadn't fully considered. My sister Ruth lived across the country and was dealing with her own health issues. I had a few close friends, but asking them to manage my affairs felt like an enormous burden. What are my options? Patricia walked me through several alternatives: professional trustees, charitable foundations, even a trust structure that would provide for worthy causes after my death. For the first time in months, I felt like I was making decisions based on my own values rather than someone else's manipulation. "I want to establish a trust," I decided, "something that will support education and elder care services, and I want you to serve as the trustee." "Are you certain about this, Eleanor? This is a significant change." I thought about Harold's face the day he'd signed our original will, how proud he'd been to know he was providing for our daughter's future. He would be heartbroken by what she'd become, but he would understand my decision to protect the legacy he'd worked so hard to create. "I'm certain." The paperwork took 2 hours to complete. New will, new power of attorney, new beneficiary designations, new account authorizations. With each signature, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Not the weight of responsibility, but the weight of manipulation and exploitation. As we finished the last document, Patricia looked at me with something that might have been admiration. "Eleanor, I have to say, I'm impressed. Most people in your situation struggle with these decisions for months. You've acted with remarkable clarity and strength." "I had a good teacher," I said, thinking of Harold. "My husband always said that when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. My daughter has shown me exactly who she is." Walking out of Patricia's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of my own power. Not power over others, but power over my own life, my own choices, my own future. I wasn't being vindictive or cruel. I was being protective of the legacy Harold and I had built together. The drive home gave me time to think about what came next. Autumn and Blake would discover the frozen accounts within hours, maybe less. There would be phone calls, accusations, probably another confrontation. But this time, I would be ready. This time, I wouldn't be the victim of their manipulation. This time, I would be the author of my own story. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Blake's car was gone. They must have left while I was downtown, probably off spending more of what they thought was their money. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on me. While they were out exploiting me, I was across town protecting myself. I walked into my house, not theirs, and felt it breathe differently around me. The walls no longer felt like they were closing in. The silence no longer felt oppressive. For the first time since Harold's death, my home felt like mine again. I was no longer just surviving my grief. I was reclaiming my life. And tomorrow, when Autumn discovered what I'd done, she would learn that love doesn't mean accepting abuse, and family doesn't mean tolerating theft. She would learn that her mother still had some fight left in her. The first sign of trouble came at 4:30 that afternoon, when my phone started buzzing with text messages. I was in my garden, something I hadn't done in months, finally tending to the roses Harold had planted for our anniversary 15 years ago. The simple act of pruning dead blooms and watering neglected soil felt therapeutic, like I was caring for something that actually deserved my attention. The first text was from Autumn. "Mom, my card was declined at Target. Can you check with the bank?" 5 minutes later, "Mom, seriously, something's wrong with the account. Call me." Then, "Mom, what did you do? Blake's card was declined too." I continued pruning my roses, letting the messages accumulate. Each buzz of the phone felt like validation that I'd made the right decision. They hadn't even lasted a full day without access to my money before panicking. By 5 o'clock, my phone was ringing constantly. I let every call go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to face them yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to be completely prepared for what was coming. This confrontation needed to be on my terms, not theirs. The voicemail started confused and escalated quickly to frustrated, then angry. By the 6th message, Blake's voice was barely controlled rage. "Listen, Eleanor, I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to fix this situation right now. We have commitments, we have bills to pay. This is affecting real people's lives." Real people's lives. As if mine didn't count. The 7th message was Autumn, tears in her voice. "Mom, please call me back. I don't understand what's happening. Did someone hack your accounts? Are you okay? I'm worried about you." Even now, even caught red-handed, she was trying to manipulate me with false concern. I was making myself a quiet dinner when I heard Blake's car roaring into my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched them both storm up my front walkway, Autumn's face flushed with anger, Blake's jaw set in determination. They didn't knock. They used Autumn's key, which I'd forgotten she still had. "Mom!" Autumn's voice echoed through my house as they burst through the front door. "What the hell is going on?" I took a deep breath, smoothed my blouse, and walked calmly to meet them in my living room. They both looked frantic, hair disheveled, clothes rumpled, like they'd spent the day running around trying to solve their sudden cash flow problem. "Hello, Autumn." "Blake?" I kept my voice level, pleasant even. "I wasn't expecting you." "Weren't expecting us?" Autumn's voice cracked with incredulity. "Mom, our cards were declined everywhere today. The bank said the accounts were frozen. What happened? Did someone steal your identity?" The performance was almost convincing. If I hadn't heard her laughing about my stupidity just 12 hours earlier, I might have believed the confused, concerned daughter act. "No one stole my identity," I said, settling into Harold's old armchair. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. This was his chair, where he'd made family decisions with wisdom and strength. I froze the accounts myself. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched their faces process this information, saw the moment when confused concern transformed into calculating anger. Blake was the first to speak, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "You froze the accounts? What gives you the right to do that? Those are our cards, our money." "Actually," I said, my voice still calm, "they're my accounts, my credit cards, and my money, always have been." Autumn stepped forward, her hands shaking, not with fear, but with rage. Mom, what are you talking about? You gave me those cards to help manage your finances. You asked me to take over your bills. I asked you to help me organize my payments, I corrected. I didn't give you permission to spend $40,000 of my money on vacations, jewelry, and cash advances. The color drained from Autumn's face, but Blake's expression hardened into something ugly. Look, Eleanor, I think you're confused about what's been happening here. Your daughter has been taking care of you, managing your affairs because you were clearly overwhelmed after Harold died. Now you're having some kind of breakdown and making accusations that could destroy your relationship with the only family you have left. The calculated cruelty of using Harold's death and my loneliness as weapons against me was breathtaking, but I was ready for this. Without saying a word, I reached for the folder I'd prepared and set it on the coffee table between us. Bank statements, printed transaction records, screenshots of charges, everything meticulously organized and highlighted. Calcon vacation, March 15th through 22nd, I read from the top sheet. Total cost, $4,700. I don't recall being invited on this vacation or even being told about it. Autumn's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Blake's face flushed red. Elite Fitness Solutions, monthly charges of $250 for 6 months, I continued. Blake's gym membership, paid with my credit card. Luxe and Lovely Boutique, $847 for what my credit card company tells me was a diamond necklace. I looked up at my daughter, who was now wearing said necklace. It's lovely, by the way, though I would have appreciated being consulted before purchasing it. Blake stepped forward aggressively, his voice rising. This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything around. Autumn has been nothing but devoted to you, and this is how you repay her, by humiliating her with accusations and cutting off her financial support? Her financial support? I felt my own anger beginning to surface for the first time. Blake, my daughter is 32 years old with a master's degree. When exactly did supporting herself become my responsibility instead of hers? Where you made her dependent on you, he shot back, when you inserted yourself into every aspect of her life with your money and your guilt trips and your emotional manipulation. The audacity was stunning. He was actually trying to frame my victimization as his girlfriend's abuse. Autumn found her voice then, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. Mom, I know some of the charges look bad, but I was going to pay you back. Everything we spent was for legitimate reasons. The vacation was for Blake's business networking. Stop. The word came out sharper than I intended. Just stop with the lies, Autumn. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opening the voice memo app I'd learned to use just that afternoon. Technology skills I'd thought were beyond me had suddenly become very important. I'm going to record this conversation, I announced, holding up the phone. For my protection and yours. I want everything we say here to be documented. Blake's face went white. You can't record us without our permission. Actually, in this state, I can record any conversation that takes place in my own home, I said, grateful for Patricia's thorough briefing. This is a one-party consent state, and I'm consenting to record my own conversation. This is insane, Autumn exploded. Mom, what has happened to you? You're acting paranoid and vindictive, and I'm acting like someone who overheard her daughter laughing about how clueless and desperate she was, I interrupted quietly. I'm acting like someone who heard her own child mock her grief and her loneliness while planning how to steal more of her money. The silence was absolute. They both stared at me with the horrible realization that their private conversation hadn't been as private as they'd thought. Blake recovered first, his voice taking on a threatening tone. You were eavesdropping on us? That's a violation of our privacy. In my own house? On people who were going through my financial documents without permission? I laughed, a sound that surprised me with its strength. Blake, I think you need to reconsider who the victim is in this situation. Autumn tried a different approach, dropping to her knees beside my chair like she was 12 years old again. Mom, please, you don't understand. We never meant to hurt you. We love you. I love you. You're my mother. Then why, I asked, my voice breaking slightly for the first time, did you call me pathetic? Why did you laugh about my grief? Why did you use my loneliness as a tool to steal from me?" She had no answer for that. Neither of them did. Blake tried one last manipulation. "Fine, you want to cut us off? Go ahead. But don't come crying to us when you're sitting alone in this empty house with nobody who cares about you. Don't call Autumn when you need help or company or someone to care whether you live or die." It was the final confirmation I needed that this had never been about love or family. This had always been about money and control. I stood up from Harold's chair, my voice calm and clear. "Blake, you need to leave my house right now, and you're not welcome back. You can't kick me out, I live here." "No," I said firmly, "you don't. You've been a guest in my home and that invitation is now rescinded. Leave or I'll call the police." He looked to Autumn for support, but she was staring at the floor, finally understanding that their scheme had collapsed completely. "Fine," he spat, "but this isn't over. You can't just steal our lives away because you're having some kind of senior moment." "The only thing stolen here," I replied, "was $40,000 of my money. And yes, Blake, this is over." As he stormed toward the door, I called after him, "Oh, and Blake, I'll be changing the locks tomorrow, and the security codes, and filing a report with the police about the unauthorized use of my accounts." The front door slammed so hard it rattled my windows. Autumn remained, kneeling on my floor, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, my maternal instincts almost overrode my newfound clarity. Almost. "Mom," she whispered, "please don't do this. Please don't destroy our family." "Sweetheart," I said sadly, "our family was destroyed the moment you decided to see me as a bank account instead of a person. I'm just finally accepting that reality." She looked up at me then, and for a brief second I saw a flicker of the daughter I'd raised, ashamed, remorseful, genuinely sorry. But then her expression hardened again. "You'll regret this," she said, standing up. "When you're old and sick and alone, you'll remember this moment and regret throwing away the only family you had left." "Maybe," I said, "but I'll regret it with my dignity intact and my bank account secure." She followed Blake out the door, leaving me alone in my living room with the voice recording still running on my phone and the strangest sense of peace I'd felt in years. I was alone, but for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't lonely. The silence that followed their departure wasn't the oppressive quiet I'd grown accustomed to since Harold's death. This was different, clean, purposeful, mine. I stood in my living room for several minutes, listening to the sound of my own breathing and the gentle tick of the grandfather clock Harold and I had bought for our 10th anniversary. For the first time in 2 years, my house felt like it belonged to me again. The first thing I did was walk through every room, really seeing my home for what it had become. In what used to be Harold's office, I found evidence of their extended occupancy. Blake's clothes hanging in the closet, toiletries scattered across the bathroom counter, even mail addressed to him at my address. They hadn't just been staying here occasionally, they had moved in without my permission, transforming my private sanctuary into their personal hotel. I began gathering Blake's belongings methodically, placing everything in garbage bags with the same calm efficiency I'd used to organize my financial documents. His expensive cologne, probably purchased with my money, designer jeans that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, a laptop bag filled with what appeared to be get-rich-quick scheme materials and printed emails about cryptocurrency investments. Each item I packed felt like reclaiming a piece of my space, my peace, my autonomy. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was too hot, too chaotic for what I was feeling. This was something cooler and more powerful: determination. When I finished with Blake's things, I tackled the kitchen. They'd gradually taken over my pantry with expensive specialty foods, exotic teas, and organic supplements that cost a fortune and cluttered my carefully organized shelves. Out it all went. I wanted every trace of their presumptuous occupation erased from my home. The most painful discoveries were in my own bedroom. Somehow, Autumn had started storing things there too. Jewelry in my dresser drawers, shoes in my closet, even personal documents mixed in with my own papers. Finding these intimate intrusions felt like discovering that strangers had been living in my most private spaces. As I worked, my neighbor Dorothy appeared at my kitchen door, her face creased with concern. We'd been friends for 15 years, ever since she and her husband Jim had moved in next door. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed things. When your newspaper wasn't picked up, when your car hadn't moved in a few days, when unfamiliar vehicles were parked in your driveway too often. "Eleanor, honey, I saw all the commotion earlier," she said gently. "Are you all right?" I paused in my packing, a bag of Blake's supplements in my hands. Dorothy had tried to warn me months ago about how often that young man was at my house, how expensive his car looked for someone who supposedly didn't have work. I dismissed her concerns as nosiness at the time. "I'm fine, Dorothy. Better than fine, actually. I'm finally dealing with a problem I should have addressed months ago." She stepped into my kitchen, looking around at the garbage bags with understanding in her eyes. "They were taking advantage of you, weren't they?" The simple, direct question broke something loose in my chest. Yes, they were. And I let them because I was so afraid of being alone that I couldn't see what was really happening. Dorothy nodded slowly. "Grief makes us vulnerable in ways we don't expect. But Eleanor, you've never been alone. You've had people who cared about you all along. You just couldn't see us past your pain." Her words hit me like a revelation. In my desperation to maintain a connection with Autumn, I'd isolated myself from genuine relationships. I'd stopped returning calls from old friends, declined invitations to social events, even avoided Dorothy's friendly overtures because I was so focused on the one relationship that was slowly destroying me. "I've been such a fool," I said. "No," Dorothy replied firmly. "You've been a mother. There's a difference. But now you're being a smart woman, and that's what matters." After Dorothy left, promising to keep an eye on my house and help me change the locks the next day, I continued my systematic reclamation project. In the living room, I found financial documents scattered on the side table where they'd obviously been going through my papers. Bank statements, insurance policies, even Harold's death certificate, all mixed together like they were shopping for opportunities. The violation felt complete and devastating. They hadn't just stolen my money, they'd rifled through the most intimate details of my financial and personal life, looking for vulnerabilities to exploit. This wasn't desperate children seeking help, this was calculated predation. I gathered all my important documents and carried them to Harold's old safe. The combination's still the same after all these years. The date we'd first met. As I locked away my financial records, my insurance policies, my will, and Harold's military papers, I felt like I was rebuilding the fortress of privacy that every person deserves around their personal affairs. The next symbolic action felt the most significant. I went to my bedroom and opened the jewelry box Harold had given me for our 25th anniversary. Inside was the spare key to my house, the one I'd given Autumn for emergencies, that had somehow become her permanent pass to invade my life whenever convenient. I took that key and dropped it into the kitchen trash can, where it landed with a small, satisfying clink among Blake's discarded supplements. Then I called a locksmith. "I need all my locks changed," I told the dispatcher. "Today, if possible, and I want to upgrade to a security system." "Ma'am, is this an emergency situation? Are you in immediate danger?" I considered the question seriously. Was I in danger? Not physical danger, perhaps, but definitely financial and emotional danger as long as they maintained access to my home and my life. "Yes," I said finally. "I think I am." The locksmith arrived within 2 hours, a kind, older gentleman named Frank, who took one look at my situation and seemed to understand exactly what was happening. He'd seen it before, he told me as he worked. Adult children who saw their parents' homes as extensions of their own property, who felt entitled to access and control over their parents' lives. "You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Coleman," he said as he installed the third new deadbolt. "People think changing locks is mean, but protecting yourself isn't mean, it's necessary." By evening, My house had been completely transformed. New locks, new security codes, new sense of boundaries. I'd filled 6 garbage bags with Blake's belongings and left them on my front porch with a note. "Blake, your belongings are here. Do not enter my house to retrieve them." As darkness fell, I walked through my home one more time, seeing it with fresh eyes. Without their clutter, their presumptuous occupation, their sense of ownership over my space, everything looked different, cleaner, calmer. Mine. I stood in my living room, surrounded by the photographs that had witnessed today's confrontation, and realized that for the first time since Harold's death, I could breathe deeply in my own home. The air itself felt different, lighter, fresher, free of the toxic undercurrent of manipulation and exploitation that had poisoned my daily life. My phone rang around 8 o'clock. Autumn's number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, 20 minutes later. Again, I ignored it. The third call came from a number I didn't recognize, probably Blake's phone. I didn't answer that one either. I was done being available for their drama, their emergencies, their manipulative demands for my attention. They would have to learn to solve their own problems with their own resources, the way functional adults do. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months. My bedroom door was locked, something I hadn't done since Harold was alive, and my house was secure. No one could enter without my permission. No one could rifle through my belongings while I slept. No one could make themselves at home in my private space without invitation. For the first time in years, I felt my home breathe again. And more importantly, I felt myself breathe again. Deep, cleansing breaths of a woman who had remembered her own worth. I was alone in my house, but I was no longer alone in my life. I had neighbors who cared, professionals who respected me, and most importantly, I had myself, a stronger, wiser version of myself that I was just beginning to rediscover. The liberation was complete. Now came the interesting part, learning how to live as a free woman again. The aftermath of my decision rippled through their lives faster than I'd anticipated. Within weeks, Dorothy kept me informed of the chaos unfolding next door, not out of malice, but because their drama was impossible to ignore. Blake's car disappeared first, repossessed, when he couldn't make payments without access to my credit cards. Then came the eviction notice on the apartment I'd unknowingly been funding through their miscellaneous expenses. Without my financial safety net, their entire lifestyle collapsed like a house of cards built on someone else's foundation. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Blake had tried desperately to find other sources of easy money. He'd contacted my sister Ruth, spinning elaborate stories about my declining mental health and need for family intervention. Ruth, forewarned by our recent conversations, had hung up on him. He'd even reached out to Harold's elderly brother in Florida, claiming I was being financially irresponsible and needed family oversight. Uncle Robert, bless him, had called me directly to check on my well-being. Their relationship crumbled under the pressure of actual responsibility. Without my money to cushion their poor decisions and fund their lifestyle, they turned on each other with the same viciousness they'd once reserved for exploiting me. Autumn moved back in with an old friend, while Blake apparently moved back in with his mother, a delicious irony that wasn't lost on me. The legal ramifications materialized slowly but inevitably. Detective Martinez called in late spring to inform me that the district attorney's office was moving forward with charges. Grand theft, elder abuse, identity theft, the list of felonies was longer than I'd expected. Part of me felt a pang of maternal guilt, but a stronger part of me recognized that accountability was the most loving gift I could give my daughter, even if she couldn't see it that way. The court proceedings were scheduled for fall. I would have to testify against my own daughter, recount for a jury how she'd systematically betrayed my trust and stolen my security. But I was ready. More than ready, I was determined that no other parent would suffer what I'd endured if my testimony could prevent it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in August, my name and address written in Autumn's careful handwriting. I stared at the envelope for 20 minutes before opening it, my heart racing with emotions I couldn't name. Dear Mom, I know I have no right to write to you after everything that happened. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. But I need you to know that I understand now what we did to you, what I did to you. Living without your support has been the hardest thing I've ever experienced, but also the most necessary. For the first time in years, I've had to face the consequences of my choices without someone else bailing me out. Blake and I broke up. Turned out our relationship couldn't survive when it was based on spending someone else's money. I've been going to therapy, Mom. Real therapy, not just complaining about my problems to someone who validates my excuses. My therapist helped me understand that what we did wasn't just wrong, it was abuse. I abused your love, your grief, your loneliness. I turned your pain into my profit. And I can't forgive myself for that. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not asking for your money. I have a job now, a real job. And I'm learning to live within my means. I'm just asking that you know I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry for betraying the woman who gave me everything. Love, Autumn. I read the letter 3 times, searching for signs of manipulation, for the subtle guilt trips and emotional leveraging that had characterized our interactions for so long. But this felt different, rawer, more honest, tinged with genuine shame rather than strategic remorse. Still, I didn't respond immediately. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt with pretty words alone. Time would tell whether this represented real change or just a more sophisticated manipulation. Sitting in my garden this morning, tending to roses that have flourished under consistent, loving care, I reflected on the year that changed everything. The peace I've found didn't come from my daughter's letter, though that brought its own comfort. It came from the difficult decision to protect myself, to refuse to enable destructive behavior simply because it was wrapped in familial obligation. I've learned that love and boundaries aren't contradictory forces, they're complementary ones. The most loving thing I could do for Autumn was to stop rescuing her from the consequences of her choices. The most loving thing I could do for myself was to reclaim my dignity and security. My work with the financial literacy program has connected me with dozens of seniors who've faced similar exploitation. Each story reminds me that predators count on our shame, our isolation, our belief that family relationships excuse any behavior. But family isn't a license to abuse, it's a responsibility to protect and cherish. The strength that comes from protecting oneself is different from any other kind of power. It's quiet but unshakable, born not from anger but from self-respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no, even when, especially when, that no comes at great personal cost. Harold would be proud of the woman I've become, not because I fought back against those who wronged me, but because I finally remembered that I was worth fighting for. If this story touched you, please subscribe for more real stories of courage and transformation. Sometimes we need reminding that our lives can change at any age, and that it's never too late to choose ourselves.